Hi, this is Shadi, and today we will discuss a very fun idea. Did Jujutsu come from China or Japan or India? There's just so many theories as to where it came from. Before we start and dive in to the writings, I just want to say something that this is not something easy to do. In fact, stuff that happened 100 years ago, stuff that happened a little bit less than 100 years ago, we are still debating about it. You know, the whole thing with the diaspora, what happened in Brazil, what did Maeda exactly teach? Did he know groundwork? Who exactly responsible for the groundwork in Brazil, in Japan, etc. There is even stuff that are recorded on footage in the last 3 decades that are still being debated. One great example is Yoshida and Hoist. Did he really fall asleep? Did he fall limp? Did the referee did an early stoppage? Was Hoist still wide awake? Even that we are still very much debating. So it's going to be in June 1st. It's going to be my 2nd year on YouTube. And we're still going about all this, and it gives me so much pleasure to do it, but it shows that how much we still have to learn. So what we will do today is not actually go through like historical evidence, writings on caves or drawings, but actually we're gonna do something very fun. We're gonna go through the writings of Jigoro Kano himself. We're gonna go through the book Mind Over Muscle. I'm currently rereading it, and there's just so much in it. I strongly suggest anyone gets it. Even if you have it as PDF, I suggest you get a hard copy. There is a part where he discusses the history of Jujutsu and gives a few scenarios and a few arguments against the conventional wisdom. So at first he starts talking about it. It's an art of attack and defense. It's very important to understand it because it's one of the reasons why it gained so much notoriety in the Edo period. So he explains that obviously Jujutsu is not just one school or one style or one expression. There's just so many schools that focus on different things. One more like on weapons, one more on thrusting and kicking, and one on throwing and pinning on the ground. And he explains that there's just so many expressions to it. For example, there's Taijutsu, Yawara, Judo. The first time Judo was coined as an expression was actually in the 1700s. There's also Kogusoku, Torite, Kenpo, Hakuda, and Shubaku. For example, Kano explains that Kogusoku and Torite are actually practices or practicing methods of capture and not self-defense, while others are about throwing and controlling someone in armor. So you see, there's a reason why in the Edo period Jujutsu really took on a really big role in the Japanese community, or these schools of Jujutsu, because you had the peace period where all of Japan was united. So mainly to train was mostly about surprise attacks, self-defense, throwing someone and pinning them, and defend against weapon attacks like the knife, the sword, etc. So it's not just sumo and jujutsu the way we know it now, but there's actually arresting techniques like we saw in Torite, Kogusoku, etc. And also there is the jujutsu that we know today through judo. Now let's talk about the origins of jujutsu. He says, conventional wisdom holds that in the 17th century, a man named Chen Yuan Ping came from China to Japan and introduced the techniques of jujutsu. 3 ronin, by the way, for those of you who don't know, a ronin is a samurai that has no master, so kind of like Musashi, for example. Fukuno Hichiro Yemon and Miura Yujioyemon and Isugai Jirozaemon. These are the 3 ronin. They became the disciples of Chen Yuanping, and they were inspired by his teachings and thus developed jujutsu. So this is the first theory or conventional narrative. In other schools, it is said that a doctor named Akiyama Shirobe from Nagasaki went to China. So here we have a little bit of a difference. One came from China and the other went to China. And learned Hakuda and devised jujutsu upon his return There is another theory, which is the third one, that Jujutsu began in the age of the gods and is a purely of Japanese invention. So this third one is local, and it came from Japan only. So let's start with the Akiyama debate. We're gonna go through Kano's writings, see how he debates through this, and see if I would say it holds up and also it makes sense. Let's keep in mind there is bias, there is someone that's looking to put Japan on the map, etc. So let's see if his writings holds or bear any weight. So he says, my personal opinion is that Jujutsu was created entirely by Japanese. So this is clearly his position. He makes it very clear. The theory that Akiyama was the founder of Jujutsu is propounded only by one group within the Yoshinryu. By the way, Yoshinryu is a big school of Jujutsu. It started centuries ago, but it branched out a lot. So saying Yoshinryu it doesn't mean anything. For example, the Totsuka that rivaled Kodokan was actually a branch of Yoshinryu. So it was one school or one branch of Yoshinryu that they were saying this particular story about Akiyama, which is the founder of that particular Koryu. So they were trying to give it Chinese origin, but it's only them that are saying it, not much anything else or writings that show otherwise. So this is the first one, or discarding the Akiyama narrative. Let's talk about the second one, the Chen Wanping. He says, the widely held belief Chen Wanping is founder of Jujutsu is questionable. Where is it? Okay. Because he came to Japan in 1659 and died in 1671. So he stayed there for 12 years. If he brought Jujutsu to Japan, then it was most likely only in the form of Kenpo and Hakuda, martial arts that were practiced during time in China. So he said that if there was a contribution by Chen Wanping, it was only through Hakuda and Kenpo. And he also continues to say that these two were only mainly about thrusting and kicking, so barely any grappling in them, and they were forms of striking arts and weapons. So he's saying here that partially Chen Wanping contributed to Jujutsu, and also he continues to say that arts of kicking and thrusting already existed in Japan at that time, particularly the Takeuchi Ryu of Kogusoku that was created in 1532. So he came in 1659. Takeuchi Ryu was actually founded in 1532. And also there is mid-17th century writings that includes the words yawara and kumiuchi, or grappling. So grappling and striking, thrusting and kicking were already in Japan at the time of Chen Wanping. Now, he continues to say that had a special he had some sort of contribution to Jujutsu. I'm talking about Chen Wanping, but it is not that it was like him that introduced everything and then it branches out to all the schools of Jujutsu. He also continues to say, it's not like he's taking a jab at the Chinese, but he continues to say that at that time, saying one heard or learned something from a Chinese was like saying that he learned something from a Westerner today. So it was very respect-worthy and praiseworthy, and also it held a lot of weight. He's basically saying that Jujutsu came through centuries, throughout the ancestors and many generations working out Jujutsu techniques. Now, Chen Wanping had some sort of contribution, but it is not the main seed of Jujutsu in Japan. Also, when he said that Jujutsu, if someone learns something from Chinese, it is very respect-worthy. That also gives it's like I don't know how to say this. It gives a little bit of legitimacy to the students of Akiyama or Dr. Akiyama, because he said, I learned this from China. It's a bit of a way to give himself a little bit of notoriety within his community and his school, to have a little bit of importance in Japan. history truly repeats itself. For example, when I talked with Robert Drysdale, when he said that, Maeda did not teach all that much, the Gracies, or, it was a second hand down to the Gracies. It wasn't him directly, even though, yes, he met them, but saying it's a Japanese master gives a lot of credit to the Gracie school. For example, Carlos Jr. said to Drysdale, he said, if there was no Carlos Gracie, there would be no Maeda. So in a sense, it was a give and take relationship, where the name Maeda and, someone that came from the Kodokan directly and taught them gives legitimacy to the Gracie school. But at the same time, if it wasn't for Gracie really pushing the name Maeda for the legitimacy of their school, the name Maeda would probably be forgotten, like Sada Miyako. I'll probably do a video on Sada Miyako, which is the first Japanese that actually came to Brazil. Also, the Hakuda and the Torite, or Kogusoku, the stuff that came from the Chinese. I'll probably do a video on them separately, but today we were just talking about the theory in general that, Jujutsu has its origin from China. At first, people would say it's Sui Jiao, because look at it, but you would see that Sui Jiao had, I would say, a renaissance through Boch and also some old Chinese wrestling, remnants, but it's not, your old Chinese wrestling. Jujutsu came from Japan. Yes, there is a lot of there is some emphasis from Chinese, obviously the culture, the kanji, and many things. But to say that it came completely from it, I don't see any evidence. Even like the first point where Jujutsu started to make appearance is itself still a little bit blurry, because I was debating the other day, whether it is from the 1500s or even older. I read a paper and I showed it to them, that it shows that the first evidence was actually through the Nara period, which is like the 700s and 800s, before the medieval periods. But back then it was, sumo that was really having its heyday, because its presence in the emperor's court, and also descending to the masses and becoming an art for the people that wanted to become samurais and the daimyos that were sponsoring them. So let me know what you think. If you have documents, stuff that whether pushes Kano's narrative or something against it, any evidence obviously is welcome. But I do think that Kano's theory was, it's very logical, I would say. He's comparing evidence and writings, what was available back then, etc. I strongly suggest you read the book Mind Over Muscle. And if you have anything else to add, let me know down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. I have exclusive content for the patrons only, and also don't forget to check out Josh Simon's shop in the description. This was Shadi, and thank you for listening.